One day Jesus and his friends were travelling from a place called Judea to a place called Galilee, and they were passing through an area called Samaria. Now Samaria was where Samaritan people lived. Jesus and his friends were Jewish, they were Jews, and Samaritans and Jews didn't really get on. There were lots of things they disagreed about, and normally Jews and Samaritans would have avoided one another. And usually Jews wouldn't have even travelled through Samaria. So if they needed to travel somewhere and Samaria was in between, often Jews would find another route and go a different way to avoid travelling through Samaria. But on this occasion, Jesus and his friends did travel through Samaria. Now over time there had been lots of disagreements between the Jews and the Samaritans, and often Jews and Samaritans wouldn't even talk to one another. At midday, Jesus and his disciples arrived at a well on the edge of a town called Sychar. This was all taking place in a very hot part of the world, and it was now the hottest part of the day. So Jesus sat by the well to rest, and meanwhile his disciples went into town to buy some food. While Jesus was sat at the well, a Samaritan woman came to draw some water from the well. While the woman was there, Jesus asked, "Please could you give me a drink of water?" "But you're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan," she said. "How can you ask me for a drink?" She knew that Jews and Samaritans didn't usually talk, and she knew that Jews wouldn't usually drink from the same cup or eat from the same bowl as Samaritans would. So this surprised her. She replied, "If you knew what God can give, and if you knew who I was, you would be asking me for life-giving water." "What's he talking about?" the woman thought. It confused her a bit. You see, Jesus didn't have a bowl, or a cup, or a bucket. He didn't have anything to draw water from the well. "Where would you get this life-giving water?" the woman asked. Jesus answered, "Those who drink ordinary water will get thirsty again. They'll need another drink. But I am talking about the life-giving water of eternal life, life that lasts forever." Life that lasts forever, the woman thought. This sounded good. "Give me that water," she said, "so that I'll never be thirsty again." Then Jesus said something quite strange back to her. "Go and call your husband," he said, "and come back with him." "Oh, but the thing is, I don't have a husband," she said. "That's right," Jesus said. "You've been married to 5 different husbands, and now the man you live with isn't your husband at all." The woman was shocked. How did this man know so much about her? She'd never met him, she'd never seen him before in her life. She realized that there was something very special about Jesus. Jesus wasn't just any other man. She thought, this man must be a prophet, a messenger from God. So she started talking to him about things to do with God. She said, "We Samaritans worship God on this mountain, but you Jews say that we should worship in the temple in Jerusalem." "Where you worship doesn't matter," Jesus said. "Who you worship matters. That's what's important. Soon, people will worship the one true God and follow him as he really is." "Oh well," the woman said, "I know that someday a Messiah is coming, God's promised rescuer. They'll tell us everything and explain everything we need to know." "I am the Messiah," Jesus said. "You are talking to him right now." At that moment, Jesus' disciples returned from town. The woman couldn't believe what she'd just heard. This man, the Messiah, God's promised rescuer? She dropped her water jar and raced back into town, telling everyone she could find, "Come and meet the man who told me everything I've ever done. Could he really be the Messiah, God's promised rescuer?" The Samaritans in town were amazed when they heard what the woman was saying. They came out and met Jesus. And that day, lots and lots of them truly believed that Jesus was the Messiah, that Jesus was God's promised rescuer. Now you see, hundreds of years before this story took place, God had promised a Messiah. He had promised that a person was going to come into this world to perfectly represent him, so that you could look at this person and you would see exactly what God was like, and you would know exactly what God was like. This person was going to come into the world and rule as a king. He was going to establish and build up a kingdom and then rule over it. And thirdly, this person was going to come into the world to save people from their sin, to rescue them from all of the wrong that they had done. And the woman knew this. She knew this promise. And she'd obviously heard or read about it because she mentions the word Messiah. And as soon as she mentions that word to Jesus, Jesus responds to her by telling her, I'm the Messiah. I'm that person, the person who was written about and told of hundreds of years ago, who was going to come into this world to perfectly represent God, to establish a kingdom, to build up a kingdom and then rule over it as king, and to save people from their sins. That's me. I'm the promised rescuer. I'm going to achieve all of the things that were promised hundreds of years ago. So that's the first thing we need to remember from this story, is that Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the promised rescuer. There's no point in looking anywhere else. There's no point in looking at anybody else. Jesus is that person. He comes into this world with an offer, and he talks of that offer to the woman, and he uses the well that they sat by as a picture. And he explains that anybody who comes to this well to have a drink will have to come back at some point. No matter how much water they drink in one go, it's not going to keep them going forever. They will need to come back and have another drink. And he explains that actually he can offer living water. And the living water he's talking about is a picture of what he then goes on to say is eternal life, life that lasts forever. And he says, I can offer you that. As the promised rescuer, I can offer you this life that lasts forever. And the lovely thing is that he makes that offer to you, and he makes that offer to me. In fact, he makes that offer to anybody. The person that he was speaking to here was a Samaritan. So it was a person who probably wouldn't have been speaking to him usually because he was a Jew. She was also a woman, which at that time, hundreds and hundreds of years ago in Israel, would have meant that perhaps she wasn't spoken to in the same way as men, and wasn't looked at in the same way as men, didn't have the same respect as men. And she had also had a number of different husbands. So in lots of ways, this might be a person that wouldn't expect to receive this offer. But Jesus gives her this offer. And it shows that he's willing to offer this life that lasts forever to anybody. It doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter what you've done or what you're like, whether you're young or old, or a good person or a bad person, or a strong person or a weak person. Jesus offers this life that lasts forever to each of us. He offers it to you, and he offers it to me.